All right, guys, what's going on? iCoach VIP members back once again for another expert interview, this time with my girl, Bri Branklin. Yes, I love that. She's going to do all the jokes today, and she's going to be hilarious, and I can't wait to dive in.
No pressure.
No pressure, yeah. What's going on, Bri? How are you?
I'm good. Very good this morning. I'm excited to talk about this super sexy topic.
Yes. So guys, what we're going to dive into today is we're going to talk a lot about stress, and there's no better person to talk about it than Bri, because she kind of went through a lot of this stuff in her own life, and like she's really had to dive in and like figure out, okay, like how do I start combating everything that's causing these issues, and how do I start living my life in a way that just allows me to like feel better and be less stressed and all these things. So I probably butchered that a bit. I'll let you kind of intro it. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself and like what you do and how you got into the field.
Yeah. So right now I currently program outside the gym stuff. Essentially, that's really the kind of nuts and bolts of it. I owned a gym for a few years. I started coaching in CrossFit a few years ago. Loved it. It dramatically altered my career plans in a really great way, though, because it was something that allowed me to pour in a lot of my passion. And you know, you get to see people's lives change. It's kind of addicting. It's pretty great. And then I opened a gym in 2014. I went through that process with a partner. And throughout those years, kind of struggled with my own nutrition and lifestyle stuff. Less so on the training front, because I love to train, but my body was also a bit broken down from years and years of gymnastics and ballet. So I did it as long as I could. And then when I felt like my body was just really not handling it much more, it was almost like I felt like I lost that piece a little bit. But again, throughout those years of coaching, owning the gym, one of the things that kind of frustrated me was seeing how difficult a time we all had with the 23 hours outside the gym, right? The 1 hour inside, that was where we just we banked on that. We studied, I was certifications, all kinds of practical application and experience. We just really tried to crush that 1 hour in the gym. And then there was this kind of nebulous, and it's sleep and stuff and no sugar and stuff. And, every once in a while you could fine tune one of those pieces and people's results would just, explode. But it still seemed very undefinable, which made it hard to approach and daunting. So when I continued to struggle with my own nutrition, lifestyle things and areas, I realized that if I couldn't, when this was technically my full-time job, if I couldn't figure out a way to make it simple, then it was pretty ridiculous to expect people with, kids or busy corporate jobs to be able to figure it out, whatever it was. So I just really try to dive in deep, and a lot of that was just my own trial and error type thing, but a lot of even just the pinging back and forth and experimenting, etc. The more I dug into it, the more I learned, the more I started sounding like the people that we kind of have heard throughout the years that are all about balance and sustainability and all these really foreign words to me. And it was just very annoying because I was like, man, dang it, those people were right, weren't they? It doesn't have to be that complicated. How crazy. So that's what led me down the path of trying to kind of conquer this Leviathan almost of, figuring out the nutrition stuff. My biggest checkpoint came when, and this is kind of how it ties into stress and why I feel like it's so applicable, is early last year, I started having these very weird symptoms. I didn't really know what was going on. I'd eat a salad, perfect, beautiful, amazing salad, and my stomach would just bloat insanely. And it was really uncomfortable. I had already, been experiencing really poor sleep for a long time. It's just, being a gym owner, it's just totally erratic and crazy. But when I started experiencing such uncomfortable gut stuff and I didn't know what was going on, I thought maybe it was some type of infection. I was put on a round of antibiotics. It was literally the worst thing I could do, but that's usually what they try first in traditional medicine. And
all right.
Yeah, exactly. And it took a couple of months, but this is, Dr. Ben House is who I ended up getting with because my little brother had been working with him. And I was like, just whatever, just like give me someone who will be able to look further into it. It took us a couple of months, but we pinned down gut dysbiosis, which essentially is an imbalance of the bacteria in our guts. Since we have many, many, many different kinds, there's, kind of pathogenic or dysbiotic, the bad bugs. And then there's the good bugs, which we really want, which help us with pretty much everything. I had pretty aggressive levels of the bad guys. And it was causing, mental fog, fatigue, irritability. I was constantly overwhelmed by things. And personally, I kind of always consider myself like pretty good at dealing with almost anything. I was, high driver, high motivation, very purpose driven, et cetera. And I just kind of stopped, like I lost all motivation for everything. I was constantly exhausted and overwhelmed. And so it's been a really fascinating process to see how physical, how literal symptoms can be in the body related to these things, the actual ramifications of stress. And that's really what we kind of pinned it down to is I've mentioned this before in some, clients that I've talked with and kind of in some posts before. I remember asking like, how did this happen? Like when I eat poorly, I eat an ahi tuna tower. Like that's crazy. What's going on? And his first question was just, how long have you owned the gym? And I was like, well, that's rude. Man. But it was such like a pun intended gut check. Because I was like, wow, the fact that unaddressed stress coupled with, for me, just some chronic undereating, just because if you're not intentionally eating enough, it's pretty easy to undereat, was the culmination of just years of it. Right. And so it's so real. And it comes back every time, working with clients and with people and just observing our culture. Stress is this, again, nebulous thing that because we see it so often, kind of what we were talking about a second ago, it's like we're numb to it. And we're like, we're all stressed. Let's be stressed together, whatever. So we normalize the symptoms of potentially far greater ramifications down the road. So I think I hit your question somewhere in that meandering path of words.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, and you're completely right. Like, I mean, we have this way of like thinking that we're like invincible, right? And like I always correlate it back to like, I don't know how much you know about my story, but like, to like
Yeah.
times, and like it's the same exact thing. Like we don't sometimes we just need a wake up call, right? Like sometimes we need something to happen to us for us to
Yeah.
realize that like we're not invincible, and like we need to start like honoring like the one body that we have, because we only get. And like most of the time we wait until we have to address it, right? Rather than being like proactive.
Right.
So I correlated to like me back then in the day. It was the same exact thing. It was like I had to like, get in trouble and like hit rock bottom and all of these things before I woke up. And I was like God was like, like.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the greatest thing, right? And it's like why I don't get, it's not, there's no scenario in which I feel like, oh, get your act together, you dummy. Cause it's like, that would be the most hypocritical thing ever, right? Like I needed a wake up call.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's like the opposite of the message I want to send. It's more like, there's kind of two options here, right? Like either you're probably like a normal human biologically, physiologically, and it requires like something to gain your attention to change your course trajectory, which is normal because like we don't like doing things out of the norm. Or like maybe you can be a little bit of like an upgraded like superior human and be like, oh, I can kind of get out in front of this a little bit, and it's probably not very hard because it's really not. And those are the people that I like really admire. And I like try and I try and get that message out to those people, as well as the ones that are kind of starting to see like, oh, wait a second, something's a little off. Let's catch you before it turns into something that really sucks, because gut dysbiosis really sucks, guys.
Well, I mean, and like that's why I get so much out of like talking to people like you and others that like, I mean, again, I haven't gone through that. I also never had to like lose a whole bunch of weight or anything.
Yeah.
But like I've worked with like thousands of people. Like I've learned a lot. Like I don't think that I have to go through it necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also really honor the fact that like people that actually go through it, they do have a whole nother level of understanding that I just can't have because I haven't gone through it myself. But learning, right? Like learning from,
Yeah.
like, I hear something like this and I think to myself, like, I'm super stressed all the time. Like I'm an entrepreneur and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, my health is my greatest asset, right?
Yeah.
I can't lead from the front. I can't deliver for my clients. I can't make the impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I'm not like 100 myself, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that one liner of like, my health is my greatest asset. Like that's just,
Mm-hmm.
I try to remind myself of.
Well, it's such an interesting concept that I've thought about before too. And I was raised traditional Christian. So there's a very strong message of, you know, you put yourself last versus put everyone else first, right? And this isn't me knocking that mentality at all. It's just I've noticed a correlation between, you know, females in particular, but certainly across the board males, the difficulty in prioritizing health or anything that looks like health or what's good for a person, because we've really been inundated with the message that to prioritize yourself is selfish, right? And so there's, you know, there's something in there that I might really want to explore at some point, but I really have noticed a very strong correlation. And personally, that's probably what it felt like for me too for a very long time is, you know, well, I got to make sure that everyone else is taken care of and like the people pleaser mentality, et cetera. When now what really ticks that light on is recognizing that when I care for myself, and I don't use a lot of the self-care because that can kind of like trigger some people, and I don't know, I'll come up with a better word, but when I care for myself and when I really put those pieces in place, it helps me be so much better for the people in my life. I am now these days, I mean, it makes me giddy when I think about being able to like serve my best friend and like babysit her kids and to be there for family events when for years, I just like, I was just constantly tapped out because I was giving myself to so many other people who honestly weren't even asking me to do it. You know, it's like, I was just like that martyr syndrome, you know? But it's really hard when you get stuck in that rut and you just like can't quite be like, wait a second, when I say like no and when I actually take care of myself, it means that I'm like way better in all the areas that I'm trying to be better at. So it's kind of making that shift that was really powerful for me.
Absolutely. I mean, and I completely agree. Like, I think like I see it all the time. Like most of the clients we work with are women and like I see it all the time. I grew up my whole life with my mom being this way.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's human nature, right? Like
feminine essence, nurturing, caretaking for sure.
Absolutely. But I've even questioned myself like throughout my life and like thought to myself like, man, am I just like selfish? But then like the more and more I learned, I was like,
yeah, you're so selfish, Justin, clearly.
but I would think to myself, I was like, I always prioritize like myself first because I know that and I might not be like 100% prioritized, but like I have to prioritize myself so that I can help others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like one of the biggest examples is like we run ourselves to the ground and we get sick. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sick. Who takes care of everybody now? Right?
Exactly.
So I think that it's probably something that I learned very early because I had to, like when I came back from getting in trouble, I had to kind of block out like the old friends and that type of thing, really get laser focused on me.
Yep.
So I think from 18 years old, I learned that like you need to prioritize yourself first because before you got caught up in trying to be cool and like hang out with everybody and like be the cool kid and whatever, and like you went into that crowd, that lifestyle, and you weren't doing things for you were doing things for everybody else.
Right. Yeah, totally can see the parallel there.
So I love that intro. So let's talk about it. Like let's dig into it a little bit more. Like what is stress? Like what is stress and what does stress mean to you?
Right. So, and we, I figured we'd want to nerd out a little bit here. And just like to the extent that, people can kind of connect with it. Cause sometimes we get like a little bit of a nugget and we're like, oh, that's what's happening. But, really when we look into stress, it's anything that, it's the physical response in our body to a stressor. And that can be internal, it can be external, it can be emotional, it can be environmental. So some of those stressors are conscious that we're very aware of. and some of them we aren't aware of, and those can be the more insidious ones, right? But every time we're stressed, our body releases a chemical into our body. Usually through, and this is what I figured would be interesting for people, through the HPA axis, right? Adrenal fatigue was a term that we were throwing around a few years ago. I was like, yep, hey, adrenal fatigue. The more you look into it, the more you recognize that it's adrenal fatigue in the sense that our adrenals get tired of releasing cortisol. There's a lot of quotation marks there. Like reminded me of like Michael Moore. Anyways, is really not supported by studies, right? It's not very scientific. That's not quite what's happening. It's a bit more complex. It's involving more systems. And then we get into the HPA axis, which, like, here are our big words, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. So these three systems that work together to respond to stressors, to release endocrines, all of those things that help us maintain homeostasis. Or in the case of stressors, give us more strength, give us more energy, which is what happens. So the hypothalamus, we've probably heard of that. It's in our forebrain, and it really tries to regulate the body's homeostasis, okay? The pituitary gland, which is basically the master endocrine gland. Endocrine is like sexy word for hormones. So that's all we need to know about that one. So it really helps modulate, what and where, needs to go. And then, of course, we've got adrenal above the kidneys, and it's mostly responsible for releasing like cortisol, norepinephrine, et cetera. And really the only point there that is kind of applicable, because who needs to remember all of those words, is that actually even necessary for us? Not really, but to understand that, as always in the body, there's these systems that are working in concert behind the scenes, really trying to help keep us responding to things well and keeping us normal, because the body loves homeostasis. And so it is less about, exhausting our release of cortisol than it is about messages coming into our brain, and our brain kind of sending out all these different firings, and then it coming back, which then affects the next firing, which is essentially a feedback loop, which we've heard that anywhere. So what's fascinating about this is the dysfunction that is more commonly discussed, is HPA axis dysfunction. And that is when we're, releasing too often, or where the messages are getting kind of relayed, mixed up, et cetera. And the symptoms are probably things that many people experience that they would commonly associate with adrenal fatigue. But again, it's just a little bit more happening in the body. But it can be, stress. What does that mean? But a lot of times, like second wind, if you get a second wind late at night, that's a common sign of just, cortisol and HPA axis kind of firing at inappropriate times. If you don't sleep well, if you don't get quality sleep, if you feel like you have a hard time recovering from exercise or just from stressors in general, if you get really frequent energy slumps during the day, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, is often a result of HPA axis dysfunction. Irregular menstrual cycles for women, if you feel like you need caffeine. So like all of these things that when we go down the list, we're like, that seems like really common stuff, because a lot of people, all you got to do is scroll through Instagram and memes to be like, whoa, everyone's really tired all the time. And it's crazy, right? Yeah. So that's usually what's probably happening there. Less of, overfiring of cortisol, et cetera, not necessarily that, and more just we're not giving our bodies like appropriate inputs, or maybe we're asking for too much from them, and then all these systems are kind of feeding off of each other. So I kind of want to just give like a bite size, because HPA axis goes around and it's like, sexy.
Yeah, well, and you're completely right. I mean, I used to say the same thing too. I mean, we always, it was like adrenal fatigue, and then now it's like the axis dysfunction, and like whatever. It's like it's fucking stress, okay, people? Like it's stress, okay?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I love the most, is like we can always dive in, there's the conversation that always picks up with like RD and like masters and PhD and like all this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, guys, like the information is out there everywhere.
Yeah.
Phillips quote, right? The information's out there, not just in the application. Like anybody can go out there and study this stuff. What us as coaches are trying to do is we're trying to take this information, this research, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Application, we're trying to present it in a way that like y'all actually want to consume it, right?
Exactly. That's literally what I say all the time. It's like, our jobs would be completely obsolete if all it required was knowledge, because it's the difference between knowledge and application. That's what got me stuck for so many years. I had so much knowledge. I was constantly consuming. I was getting, all the certifications, all the mentors, all the education. And I was like, why can't I figure this out? It's like weird, crazy. And it's like every single time it always comes back to the most basic, simple things, which that's what I think is the most fun stuff to work with, really, to be honest. So,
well, I mean, and it comes like a lot of it comes back to like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the same thing, like working with people one-on-one, which
yeah.
people starting to realize that they really need, whether it's the education, the accountability, both, whatever. It's just, it's easier to work with somebody one-on-one and like actually move yourself forward than it is to like a template and try to follow that,
Absolutely.
But I want to dive into like, so you had talked about like when we were talking previously, so when we dive into like specifically into like the physical side of stress, like let's just talk about like, you mentioned like internal, external, physical, emotional, like let's just dive into maybe like some examples of all those, and then we'll kind of like touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah, and so this might be a good time because having a visual for like some of my more intellectual or just people that need a little bit more of like that switch to happen to where like, okay, fine, I'm connected to this and I'm bought in. Sometimes talking about the nervous system helps, like that basic of, which nervous systems are working, because I can almost visually shift. I'm like, I'm shifting into my parasympathetic state.
So one thing we talk about a lot with clients is kind of like making that T chart, right? And putting the stressors on one side and parasympathetic on the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know that stuff, but maybe you could dive into like how you talk about it.
Sure. So I always bring in the tiger example because it's so basic, right? But really all we need to understand about the nervous systems is that we have the autonomic nervous system, or the parasympathetic, and autonomic, like automatic. So this is the stuff that happens automatically for us, like breathing, thankfully, like digestion, hopefully, which I can probably dig into that a little bit because that was one of my issues. That's the, rest, digest, all the things that happen when we're at homeostasis, the stuff that goes on that we really need to. And then of course we have the CNS, the central nervous system. That's the fight or flight. And that's the tiger. And, really the least elegant but most simple analogy here, because I'm not great at analogies, is our bodies were created to deal with like a tiger running at us, and either we fight the crap out of the tiger or we run. And so those chemicals that are released into our bloodstream to give us the strength to do that, that's what gets stimulated when any stressor happens, because our brain doesn't know the difference between a tiger or between that chronic work project. And so obviously when we think about it that way, it's really clear to see, oh, so I release these chemicals because I'm running from the tiger, and then it's over and then everything gets back to normal. Whereas like we're stressed about, relationship problems. We're stressed about, too much exercise. We're doing, we're having poor sleep. We're having stress at work. We're, oh, that thing happened and set my whole day off and I was never able to recover. And it's just like releasing. Then the other analogy is very similar kind of to how we get insulin resistant with diabetes, is really a lot of those systems get almost numb to the release, and it creates this cascade of issues down the road. So I just like to say, tame the tiger, which is a very elegant hashtag, which I'll probably start working on soon. But really, it's like tame the tiger.
Yeah, that'd be a good t-shirt.
I know, right? Oh my God, what a great idea. I never think of these things. I'll work on it.
That's why podcasters, or whatever we want to call this, are so great.
Yes. So you just jam and thinking of stuff. All right.
I'll leak out, I guess, because I haven't talked about it, but we are actually launching a real podcast in 2019. So
nice.
Details on that. I'm honestly probably just going to use like the audio from all of these that I've done and like.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Fill it up and start it off, but.
We can just cut this part out. Where we're talking about podcasts.
They'll just get the leak. They'll just be like, oh man, that's so funny. Oh, well, actually, yeah, I would have to cut it out. Yeah, I would have to cut it out.
That's okay. Your first shirts can be Tame the Tiger.
Yes, guys. Once we get to X number of downloads, you get a Tame the Tiger shirt.
Oh my God, so good. Love it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so that's kind of what, we'll have the conversation about that, so that, if we're talking about meal hygiene or like how to eat, and we're saying, okay, if we're having digestive issues, if you're having bloating, if you're having difficulty with weight, anything, like we have to look at how you're eating, right? So let's make sure that your parasympathetic central nervous system is working. It's like, okay, how do I physically shift into that? All right, well, really, it always comes down to like, well, what are the logistics? It's always so basic. Take 5 deep breaths, calm down for a second, and then chew. And it's so dorky, but like we'll kind of joke about like, I feel myself shifting.
True.
It works, man.
I mean, I've used like the Headspace app, and I've used like a few of those different, like I'm starting to get more and more into like meditation and like breathing work.
Same. Yeah.
It's hard though. Like it really is. Like you have to, it's like anything else in life, right? Like we have to like really believe in it and make it a priority for us to actually do it.
Yeah.
I always remind people, I'm like, guys, at some point brushing our teeth became important and you started doing it every single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can do this too. if it's for it, you know?
That's another area that I really, because breath work and meditation, mostly I would say probably breath work for me, was so key to making the shift in my health. And it's so crucial for so many of my clients that it's something that I really try to like make approachable, first of all, and kind of use as like the gateway to meditation. Absolutely. But it's, those are the questions that just kind of are always on my brain. Like, how can I help people connect to these practices that don't have to be complicated, that can be so simple, but it's just the low hanging fruit. Yeah. Give you a little bit of it every day. It's insane how much it can help. But it's like journaling too. All of those practices that I really couldn't get into for a really long time. Then now I'm like, why did I make that so hard? I don't know.
Things too hard, right? Like we tell ourselves a story and we blow it up. We blow it out of proportion.
Yeah.
Like I hopped on a call this morning with a client because like we didn't have a call for like 5 more days, but she sent me this really, really long text this morning. She had all this crazy stuff happen, like family and all. I was like, look, let's just hop on a call. Like, you just trust me, like this will be good. And she's in a good place. She was able to move forward rather than sit here and talk about it and tell herself her story for 5 days.
And then dig herself even deeper. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's dive into, because I really want to, like, somebody that's like being successful with breathing work and seeing it successful in your practice, like cool. Nobody's ever, like, we're talking to people, they've never done it before. Like step one, I want to try it today. What do I do? Yeah.
So I always start people out with box breathing, either box breathing or belly breathing, because those are the two that belly breathing has really been researched far more. Most of the studies have been done with, diaphragmatic, aka belly breathing, but I just can't find something that breathing doesn't help with. I can't find anything, whether it's stress relief, digestion, organ health, longevity, like it is tied to, longevity. It's so incredible. And it's really fun. So typically teaching people how to breathe, there are kind of 2 different camps of people. The ones that are like, I know how to breathe, dude. Like I'm here, but we're really not taught how to get the most out of it. It's like breathing the way we do now is like putting food in our mouth, chewing once or twice, and then swallowing. Like that's not getting the most out of your food at all. It's almost stressing the rest of your body, trying to break it down, and you're definitely not extracting all the nutrients from it. That is the first time I've come up with a good analogy on the spot. I've just got to say that real fast, because that makes sense, right? Okay, so that's it's very similar to what we do with breathing, though. When we've probably heard of like chest breathing, right? Like if your chest rises and falls as you breathe, then that means that we're not getting as much oxygen and we're not sending it as deep as we can to get the benefits. And learning how to send the breath deep into our diaphragm and into our stomach and expanding our sides is really where the money is, for sure. So it's very simple, either lying on your back or even on your stomach, to kind of assess where you're at. And like, you're probably breathing from your chest because it's normal. And so that's kind of step 1, is perhaps laying on your back or on your stomach and just saying, okay, what do I do when I'm not thinking? The second step would be, how do I breathe? Do I know how to breathe in through my nose, in and out? Or do I kind of breathe in through both? And that's another huge key. Being able to nasal breathe, which is such a weird name. Nasal breathing is linked to back issues. If the better you breathe in and out through your nose, there's less correlation to lower back issues, because if we think about it, we're engaging our core and those deep core muscles better, which helps provide support for the spine and for the back. So again, affects so many things down the chain. I think it's so interesting. It's crazy when it's like, you can do it anytime, anywhere.
Well, and I've done like the box breathing exercise. Like I mean, like no joke. I mean, we have the luxury of like working from home, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, guys, there's something I tell y'all, there's sometimes that like I literally like 5 times a day, I'll just like put on headspace and like lay on the ground. Like if I get too stressed, and I'll just do it right then on the spot. I might
Yeah.
do it the day.
Yeah.
Again, it's like going back to what you said in the beginning, it's making that shift. You can literally feel yourself make the shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic.
Yeah. It's kind of addicting too.
Yeah.
It's like the more you do it, you're like, this feels good. I like this. I like feeling good.
Well,
But you have to want to feel good.
It's a magic pill, right? Like it truly is.
It's
like,
a pill. Did you hear him? It's a pill. We love pills.
yeah. No, so that makes a lot of sense. So I guess my question would be on it is like, how long did it take you to like get into a daily practice with it?
Okay. I'm trying to think back here. So box breathing, I started a few years ago because I got it from Mark Devine of SealFit, who I think he's the best. I think he's awesome. So I learned that tactic a few years ago, and that's when it really started helping me then, to be honest. But I didn't clearly apply it as frequently or as regularly until, a couple of years ago, year and a half ago or so. And it's kind of ties back to what we were just talking about, making the shift. It always comes down to a decision, blah, 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 blah. We kind of know this, but it really did, because what I noticed is I would have these moments throughout the day where all the things I needed to do, it would just kind of like compound. It would start piling on. It was this, and I don't have time to do this. And it was that moment where you kind of are choosing between panic or just like numb, right? And I think people who are more prone to panic attacks, that is probably like, man, I had a couple of them, but never extreme, fortunately. But those are the moments when if you have a panic attack, that would be happening. And it was happening to me really, really regularly. And so what it really came down to, because I was still owning the gym, coaching, et cetera, when I was having these gut issues, I couldn't make any life work changes yet. It came down to, in that moment, instead of choosing and it's this, and it's this, and you kind of just like keep grabbing all the things that are terrible in your life and like all the things that are wrong. And like, it's just very weird mental thing. I was like, this isn't working. Like thinking this way, it's just not working for me. So why am I continuing to do it? If I think that this tactic or this breath work or meditation is cheesy or whatever, well, at least it's something. Like that's staying here where I'm at in this headspace sure as hell isn't doing anything for me. So why am I like choosing suffering? That's so weird. Like, why do that? So I made my first kind of brain shift habit was recognizing when those moments were starting to happen. And instead of like getting really frenetic with my time, being like, okay, whatever, I went outside and literally sat down. It's like the moment when I felt like I had the most to do, when I was freaking out, I literally was just like, I stopped doing everything. I would go and I'd go sit at a freaking tree, and I would just sit there for a few minutes. Like I couldn't do it for very long at first, but I would just sit there and like do the breath work and like do box breathing and just kind of calm down. And what I noticed over probably not that long, perhaps a few weeks for me, because I'd kind of dug myself into a bit of a hole. When I came back in every single time, I was like, what's the most important thing to do right now? Okay, I'll start with that one thing. And so, yeah, I was like, yeah, I mean, one thing in essentialism, that is just like massive, shifts for me, but it really is, it's insanely powerful. So that was kind of how I shifted into it. And of course I didn't do meditation for a while because I was also the person that would like freak out and get anxious if I just had to sit there. So
yeah. No, I mean, I think a lot of people have anxiety and again, like stress, anxiety, like, whatever you want to call it. But like, man, my wife, she woke up like in the middle of the night, like a few nights ago, this was like 2 weeks ago, like having a full blown like anxiety attack. And
She's
crying.
pregnant too, right? There's a lot of things going on there.
And
Bless her.
so she, you know, like, it's just like, it's a very, very real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, at the end of the day, like, you have to take a step back. You have to have that 10,000 foot view, and you have to ask yourself, like, if I do that T-chart exercise and I see that sympathetics are completely full and I have like one thing over here I'm parasympathetic, like, I gotta start balancing the chart, because if not, like, you're kind of like doing this to yourself, you know, like, and it's a hard thing to realize. Like, we all,
no, we don't want to hear that.
we don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
We don't. Like, and we're all stressed, right? Like, like some people are like have way more stress than others, but like stress is inevitable. It's not like it's ever going to go away. It's just like, how do I take a second to like pause, like you said, and like ask myself a question.
Yeah.
Go outside for 5 minutes and get some fresh air and breathe, and come back in and ask myself, what's the one thing that I can do right now in this moment to move myself forward?
Yeah.
That's freaking powerful, because it's so simple, but it's so powerful.
I mean, it's mind blowing what a change it is. And it's not that we don't, that's the difficulty here, right? Because it's not that we don't know this, it's that we're not doing it. And so it always comes down to the application piece. And it's what you just touched on a second ago, which was, we don't, like, no one wants to feel attacked about stress, because we truly think that that it's out of our control. And what really sucks, and which is a way, you know, I really try to find a way to say this, because my situation's not the same as, you know, anyone else's. All of our situations are unique. Absolutely. But I believe so strongly in the ability to live a lower stress life. And we think it's really hard. We think it's going to require so much sacrifice of us. And it doesn't have to at all, right? It doesn't. And it comes down to just choosing, which again, I'm like, it's so inadequate, these words I'm using. It really, I just decided to stop feeling that stressed all the time. But that it's such an inadequate way to describe it, because these days, like, man, I gotta tell you, I was a little stress basket, like little bunny hopping around for years, just like, oh, the things, and was overwhelmed and everything. These days, I'm like, when I feel even a semblance of that sensation, because my brain has new pathways now to deal with it. Like, I just know, I'm like, oh, I'm just like, I almost choose, I'm like, meh, I'm gonna not be stressed about that, because it's like really not fun. Like, it's not enjoyable, and it doesn't help. It's not productive in any way. So it sounds so basic, but I think that once we, like you said, create that new strategy of just ask yourself a question and ask yourself, do you really want to feel like shit right now? Like, if it's yes, maybe it's yes. Maybe you want to choose to suffer, and that's, everybody has to figure it out in their own time. Like, you deserve the dignity of the process of figuring that out. That's great. But if you don't want to feel like shit, there are absolutely solutions, and they're not that hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I completely agree. Like, I think that it all just comes back to, one, sometimes we have to hit, you know, like for you, like, it was like, all right, I'm done. Like, I can't be in this position where I have to change my environment. If not, freaking, who knows what's going to happen. My health problems are just going to keep getting worse and worse, right?
Yes, you have to, you know? Yeah.
But I mean, you're right. It's so hard. And like, we keep telling ourselves that, no, like, you know, I'll get back into a normal routine, or like it'll be okay, or like the stress will go away, and then it just keeps compounding and compounding.
I'll go out and drink with my friends. I'll numb, you know. Yeah. I'll go eat a pack of gummy bears. Yummy.
Yeah. So I could probably talk to you all day about this stuff, but I definitely want to.
Yeah, apparently. Good talk.
But like, one thing we kind of talk about a lot, and this is very similar, but like, I talk about like taking a jar, right? Like a glass, like mason jar.
Yeah.
Like identifying like 5 big rocks that we put in there, and then putting like a whole bunch of everything else with those little tiny pebbles, right? Or sand.
Yeah.
So like, what are your, like, talking about, like, maybe not just stress in general, but just like the top 5 like big rocks that you consistently with your clients?
With my clients? Oh, yeah, absolutely. So big rocks are always going to be the things that we all know, the fundamentals, right? So it's always going to be sleep. Just, there's no way to hack this one yet. We don't have it. So, and that one, though, of course, comes with it so so many things, because I think it's a really great litmus test for what's going on in a person's life. If they have poor sleep, we're probably going to be dealing with some type of, dysfunction in the body, or that always goes back to stress, anxiety, etc. So I love working with sleep. It's so much fun just getting simple practices like bedtime routines in place that will help people look forward to sleep, things like that, because it's just like the greatest payoff dividend. That's definitely going to be a rock. The stress management is another really, really fun rock, because you don't have to journal, you don't have to meditate, you don't have to do all that stuff. Like, there's so many different things. It's just about like, do what you enjoy. For me, it was actually jigsaw puzzles. Like, when I was really like deep in the weeds, that was the first thing that like a mono project focus that like would like kind of pull me off the edge. So
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard that one before.
Oh, I'm such a big fan. Like, I will geek out on that stuff all day. I love them. So that's something that I'll recommend. And some clients do it and they love it. So it's, it's really great. Awesome. Nourishment, obviously, the food piece is always going to be crucial, but not in the sense of getting people to eat what and when I want them to. It's a lot of assessment on what is the relationship with food and how can we move it in a way for them to start seeing it as a massive asset, and to really shift away from the restriction mindset, which is just massively prevalent. So, every once in a while I'll get a client who's just like, yeah, just tell me what to eat and when to eat it. And I'm like, well, we probably need to get you to enjoy it a little bit more. But for the most part, we've pinged back and forth so many times on different diets, etc., that there's usually some work to do in there. So that one's really rewarding. Of course, movement. And again, this one comes with its own pitfalls too. Like, CrossFitters here, so we know what it looks like to do lots and lots of training. So I'll get clients that really think that all they got to do is get in that CrossFit class for an hour a day and like they're golden. And it's, yeah, we can't help a smile. We're like, ha.
1 hour, 23 hours.
Yeah. I mean, I remember being that person though. I remember, going to classes and be like, why aren't I leaning out? It's sitting in a chair for like another 8 to 9 hours. It was just like, but I'm working so hard and I'm eating paleo.
Well, I mean, and this was like a really big piece for us, was that like, here we are, we have 15,000 CrossFit affiliates. Awesome. The pyramid, nutrition's at the bottom, but yeah. The majority of these affiliates don't have a nutrition coaching program there.
I know.
That was a big piece for us. So like, let us go in and like, let's help you develop, not some bullshit 30-day challenge, but like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, let's get one coach that likes nutrition and let's teach them how to start helping people with your other 23 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's literally how I transitioned into this job, as I was just like really tired of seeing that need not being met and not feeling like I could fulfill that need while still owning and coaching the gym, because I was trying to. And I was like, this just isn't, like, I can't put into it what it deserves. So yeah, it was a really fun move, to be honest with you.
You also had a lot, like, you had a very like big decision to make in your life, which was like, it's causing a lot of like stress and issues and all these things. Like,
yeah,
you just have to like decide, can I keep doing this, or do I have to like change course?
Yeah, that was a pretty brutal one. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I could do it. So props to you. Like,
yeah, well, it required some extraordinary circumstances, but I remember one of the times I was thinking about it, realizing really that like the only solution was to like stop having to get up at 4:45 and have this erratic schedule and whatever. And I remember, because I was so deep in it that I really couldn't, it was difficult to make decisions based on like logic and as level-headed as I used to be. And I remember thinking, okay, well, if I can't make this decision for me right now because I just feel so crappy, like nothing sounds good, I'm going to make it for the person that I hope to be in a few months or in the future, who will look back and be like, thank you so much, past crazy, unhappy, sick Bri, for doing that. And I, like, every single day I wake up and I'm like, thank you. It's the best. Like, seriously, life is good, man. Like, it really.
Like, I love that statement that you just said. We actually say something kind of similar. We're like, like future you is today's you.
Yeah.
I just love that. I think that's that's why, I mean, one of the things we always talk about is like, you know, whether you want to say 6 months or a year, or like whatever you want to say, but like think about future you and like, how do you want to feel? Like, how do you want to, you know, and like look and perform and all this stuff. But yeah, I just think like so many of us just get caught up in like the day to day, especially once we get kids and like all of these different things going on. And like, I sit here and, you know, everyone jokes with me. They're like, you know, because sleep is like non-negotiable. I'm like, don't touch my freaking sleep, I'll kill you. But I'm about to have a baby. Like, my life's gonna get turned upside down.
Like, I'm worried about you.
So, you know, but it's just like, you gotta just roll with the punches, guys. Like, you gotta bob and weave, like I say, you know. But it's, you have to also really have an honest assessment with yourself, and you have to be able to make decisions that's best for you. Like, what it comes down to. So. Awesome. Well, girl, we'll have to bring you back on and we'll talk stuff. But I'm like, God, every time I do one of these, it's just like, it flies by.
I know, it's fun though. It's fun. We get to talk about something that's really fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. But tell us, where can everybody find you at? Website, social media, all of those things. And that way they start looking at some of those cool tips that you always put up and start implementing some of this stuff in their own life.
So Instagram is where I'm mostly at. Facebook just kind of overwhelms me. But you can find me on Instagram, Coach B Frank. So pretty simple there. And then I usually expound on some of the educational or just suggestion posts in my blog, which is just at bfrankcoaching.com, I think. Yeah, bfrankcoaching.com. So yeah, totally find me there. And I love sharing that stuff. So it's just a lot of fun for me because I'm, you know, I try to make it as simple as possible to like not feel like crap every day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you've seen it work in your own life and with other clients' lives. I mean, you're paying it forward and trying to help other people because a lot of people are going through that. So
yeah, for sure.
Kudos to you for that. I love it.
Thanks for bringing me on. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me, I'll sign us off here and then we'll kind of finish things off.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.